When most people think of creation, they think of creation ex nihilo, or creation out of nothing, as Genesis depicts. But the most archaic beliefs of humanity is that creation stems from an act of killing. Specifically, the killing of a primordial being, or giant, whose dismembered body parts are then used to create the rest of the world. Something quite different than what we're used to, right? So Genesis speaks creation ex nihilo, but this is creation from life. Some academics like E.J. Michael Witzel, who is a retired professor from Harvard, believe that this myth is so old that it was with us before we even left Africa. So it can be dated to over 70,000 years ago. And if you want to know how he comes to that conclusion, I recommend getting his book, The Origins of the World's Mythologies. Now, I want to touch base on the great religionist and academic Mircea Eliade, where he speaks of the Neolithic age and how this ceaseless pursuit of hunting animal and killing animals led to this concept of sacrifice. So he specifically says that, quote, the ceaseless pursuit and killing of game ended by creating a unique system of relationships between the hunter and the slain animals. The mystical solidarity between the hunter and his victims is revealed by the mere act of killing. The shed blood is similar in every respect to human blood. In the last analysis, this mystical solidarity with the game reveals the kinship between human societies and the animal world. To kill the hunted beast or later the domestic animal is equivalent to a sacrifice in which the victims are interchangeable. We must add that all these concepts came into existence during the last phases of the process of homogenization. They are still active, altered, revalorized, and camouflaged millennia after the disappearance of the Paleolithic civilizations. Okay, so just think about that, how human evolution and millennia of hunting and killing animals led to this bizarre, albeit mystical relationship with animals and the mythology and the sacredness that became of the act of killing. Okay, it's quite remarkable. It's violent, and yet there's a certain beauty to it. And from this sprouted this mythological system about the murder of a primordial giant, this divine being who from all things were created. So let's begin with Chinese mythology and the myth of Panku. Now it's said that when Panku died, his breath became the wind, mist, and clouds. His voice thunder, his left eye the sun, his right eye the moon, his head the mountains and extremes of the world, his blood rivers, his muscles fertile land, his facial hair the stars and Milky Way, his fur bushes and forests, his bones valuable minerals, his bone marrow precious jewels, his sweat rain, and the fleas on his fur carried by the wind became animals. So quite descriptive, but not unique to Chinese mythology. So now let's jump to Europe and take a look at Norse mythology and their concept of the Ymir, who was their primordial giant. It is said, of Ymir's flesh was earth created, of his blood the sea, of his bones the hills, of his hair trees and plants, of his skull the heaven, and of his brows the gentle powers, for Midgard for the sons of men. But of his brain the heavy clouds are all created. So now you see there's a striking similarity between Chinese mythology and on the other side, European mythology. But again, this is widely dispersed, not just in geography, but also in time. It is again very archaic. So in Indian mythology, we have the myth of Purusha. And what's interesting here is that Purusha's dismembered body is not just used to create the world, but even the cosmic order. The caste system actually stems from his body parts. We can go back a little bit further to ancient Babylon, when Marduk kills Tiamat. Tiamat's body is split in half, and one half is used to create the sky, and the other half is used to create the earth. So again, we go back to this murder, this violence that's done, and then serves as religious beliefs to connect to sacrifice. Okay, sacrifice is one of the oldest institutions, and again, if we connect it with what Mircea Eliade is saying, that basically the act of hunting, right, the ceaseless pursuit of innumerable amounts of animals and game that had to be killed, right, became valorized into some kind of religious activity. So what's interesting is that you can almost see the cyclical chain, that all things derive from a sacrifice. Human beings as well as animals stem from a dismembered primordial giant, and then humans kill and dismember animals, not just for food, but for sacrificial purposes as well. So it's as if everything begins with a sacrifice and ends with a sacrifice. This is closely tied to another aspect of Stone Age religion, and namely the institution of a shaman-like figure. All right? So most of us has some kind of concept of the shaman, but again, this is a very archaic figure. And we can find one of the earliest depictions of the shaman in at least European rock art in the Lascaux cave, which is dated to some 14,000 BC. And this is quite interesting and maybe even a little disturbing. But you see here that there is a bison who is killed. There is a spear, or what appears to be a spear, running from its anus to its phallus. And next to this bison is what appears to be a bird-headed man with an erect phallus lying there. Now, some people have interpreted this as a wounded hunter. I don't think so. I think I agree with the other academics who say that this is actually a depiction of a shamanistic ritual. You have a shaman dressed in apparent animal garb, is lying there, perhaps in a trance. The erect phallus perhaps is connected to that. You have a bird parched staff that's present. And perhaps the killing of this animal ties in with the shamanic practice of generating a heat, or this energy that is supposed to rise up the spine to allow the shaman to travel into other realms, into other dimensions. So here, folks, we have something very bizarre, yet very fascinating. And it's my belief that mythology is connected to anthropology. These beliefs, these foundational ideas that are so archaic, perhaps going again as far back as Witzel says, before we left Africa, they teach us something about ourselves and something about human nature. And they're worth meditating about.